Welcome to today's Toronto Real Estate Podcast. If you personally are not ready to buy real estate this year, but you're aiming for 2025 or 2026, this episode is for you. We are going to dive into very practical steps you can take to set yourself up today for long-term real estate success, no matter where you live in this country in Canada. So, Ralph, let's get started with introductions. This is my partner in crime, the broker of record and co-founder at Fox Marin, Mr. Ralph Fox.
Thank you, Corey, for the wonderful introduction.
You are welcome.
Great to be here.
Awesome to have you here. And Obviously, my name is Corey, and I am also a co-founder of Fox Marin, and I am a broker, and we've been in this business collectively, I don't know, how long now, Ralph? 25 years collectively?
4,000 years or something.
Feels like 4,000 years. So we hope that you get lots of insight and juicy tidbits from this. If there's practical things that will be helpful, I'm going to post them into the show notes for you too. So don't worry about memorizing everything or taking notes. I'll make sure that you have like a nice summary of what we talked about in the show notes so that you can have that as a takeaway. So, Ralph, let's get started. What is one of the first things you could do? And I'm going to suggest connecting with a mortgage broker, but it'd be helpful for our viewership if they understood what a mortgage broker actually is. Because I know when I started off as a real estate purchaser, I had no idea what the difference was between a mortgage broker and then a mortgage advisor that you might meet at a chartered bank, as an example. So maybe that's a good place to start, because I think that's where most of our viewers should start if they're looking for practical tips.
Well, I think I'm going to take a step back before I start, Corey. And I just want to say, I think this is an awesome topic. A lot of times people are like, well, I think I'd like to position myself to be able to buy a property or to invest in the market in a couple of years. And then they just sort of go into freeze mode.
Yes.
Or they call an agent up and they say, yeah, I'm looking to do something in a couple of years. And the agent's like, well, call me back in a couple of years. There's a lot that you can do over the course of the next couple of years to get yourself in a position to be able to make that leap. And so it's really, really important to think long-term in anything in life, but especially when it comes to Toronto real estate and trying to get into the market, which is very challenging no matter where interest rates are. Affordability is always tough. And so it's really important to plan out a long-term strategy, especially if you're younger and watching this. There is hope. It is possible. And I think if you start to sort of put the pieces in place for a couple of years down the road, you'll position yourself for long-term financial and life success. So I really just wanted to get that off my chest. And then going back to your earlier question, and I think this is really, really, really important, is speak to a mortgage broker.
Yes.
And so, Corey, going back to your question in terms of differentiation between what is a mortgage broker versus just going to your bank, there is a really big difference. And so when you go to your bank, you walk in and you say, hi, my name is so-and-so. You sit down with somebody at retail level. Generally, without making any type of generalization that could offend anybody watching this, typically the person you will be talking to will be very junior and will not really be well-versed in a lot of the type of information that you're looking to get answers on. And chances are in a couple of years, they won't be working at that bank, or they won't be doing what they're doing when you're speaking to them. And number three is that we found that, generally speaking, mortgage brokers are far more accessible. They're business for self, and they'll take the approach to work with you now and help you put things in place or answer the questions that you need, knowing that in the future you could end up working together. And so we've always found, based on the 25 or 4,000 years experience that we have, whenever there turns out to be a problem last minute in financing, it's always when you're dealing with a bank. If you're dealing with a skilled, tenured mortgage broker, you're going to position yourself to work with somebody long-term, have a long-term relationship with that person, maybe not even with this purchase, but with future purchases. And what that mortgage broker can do, which is very different even from a competent employee of a bank who's working with you, is they can show you the vast array of options that are out there versus just what that one bank has to offer. So they can really, really shop the market, and they can also help position you because they're literally working for you, whereas a bank is working for themselves. And one of the things that I've always found from the mortgage financing side is banks tend to do things in a very counterintuitive way, the way they look at information. And so having a mortgage broker who can package you up in the best possible way, or position yourself so that in the future you can package yourself up in the best possible way, is going to set yourself up for the most amount of success long term versus walking into a bank and just speaking to somebody at retail level.
That was a great explanation, Ralph. Thank you for that. And I want to strip it down a little bit more back to the basics for our super newbies out there that are looking to acquire real estate in next year or the year following. It costs you nothing to use a mortgage broker. So you're not paying any fees to the broker. The banks pay the fees to the broker. That was one thing I was like, oh, do I have to pay this person? No fees to you as the purchaser. And things you want to ask the mortgage broker at this stage in your long-term goal of acquiring real estate is, how much do you think you'll be able to afford? What does a down payment look like? What will your monthly costs look like? What do you need on paper? What paperwork will you need? You're asking like really boring questions that are super practical so you can just wrap your head around what you need to do now to set yourself up 2 years from now. And just collecting in the information and the paperwork that's required, and then understanding down payments and understand what your monthly costs are going to be, plus property taxes, plus maybe maintenance fees if you buy a condo, whatever that is. You're just going to start laying brick by brick all these different pieces and sorting this out for yourself. This is a really important part of the process. We cannot stress how amazing it is to work with a mortgage broker that can speak to you in layman's terms and just help you. Like everyone's like, what's a fixed? What's a variable? I'm so confused. Like there's just a lot of lingo to wrap your head around. This will be a very great place for you to start.
So one of the things that we've seen with our clients is sometimes they think they can only afford $1 million budget. And then when they talk to a mortgage broker, they find out they could actually afford a budget of 1.4 million. And sometimes we see the other where they think they could, they go online and they're like, oh, what would $1 million look like? And then they go to the mortgage broker and find out that there's issues with their credit rating or there's other things going on that they're not aware of. And all of a sudden their budget goes down to $750,000.
Yes.
Oftentimes, if you talk to a mortgage broker today and they're like, you know what, when you get your raise and your bonus next year, you'll be able to afford far more than you think you can today. Or if you can increase your earnings up to a certain level in the future, it really can help position you for success in the future. And sometimes even be very enlightening to understand that you might be in a better position than you actually think you are today. Or maybe it's the opposite, but you'll never know until you have that conversation.
100%. Great advice. So I just want to touch on this quickly because this is a massive part of these practical steps is you do need to save for the down payment. And I think this is where a lot of freezing happens because it seems like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to be able to afford anything? Especially when we just hear like nonstop negative news about affordability and costs and prices and everything just keeps escalating everywhere we turn. And so I do want to make sure that anyone in this country, in Canada, can listen to this too and take the same advice from this, because this isn't only applicable to Toronto, but we're speaking so effortlessly to Toronto because this is where we work. But this applies to anyone in anywhere in Canada in terms of the down payment requirements. So if you're buying a property for $500,000 or less, you need 5% of the purchase price. So if you were to buy a small studio in downtown Toronto, let's say it's worth $475,000 on paper, that equates to a down payment of $23,750, which is not so nauseating when you look at that number. Like it's possible to save for that. The next tier on down payments is properties between $500,000 and $999,999. You need 5% of the first $500,000 of the purchase price and 10% for the portion of the purchase price beyond $500,000. So say, for example, you're buying for the first time a 1+ den condo with parking. Let's say it's worth $750,000, you would need $25,000 on that first 5%. $25,000 in the first 500,000 and an additional 25,000 or 10% on the remaining 250,000. So that equates to a total of $50,000 you need for your down payment. So we're creeping up there in terms of the amount that you're going to need to save. And then the third threshold, which is the big threshold, are properties $1 million or more, where it's required to have 20% of the purchase price as your down payment. So if you were to buy a starter home in an area like Leslieville, if it's even possible to find a starter home for $1.2 million, the down payment, okay, brace yourself here, is $240,000. Okay, so there's a massive jump once you get over the $1 million price point. So things to think about. You're going to have to put yourself on some sort of like automatic savings plan. So I know times have changed a lot since I bought my first property. So it's not really fair for me to compare this because prices have gone up so much since the first time I did this. But what I did to save for that down payment is I put myself on a certain plan where a percentage of every portion of my paycheck would go towards my savings account, and I could not touch that money. That was only for my down payment. And then I also had a part-time job where I taught fitness classes, and every single dollar that came in from that fitness class would go into that special account. And so like little by little, tiny bit by tiny bit by tiny bit, I was able to save for the down payment. But you have to put rigor around your automatic savings to even get to these numbers, especially in the climate that we're living in now, where everything is just so freaking expensive. You're also going to need to create like a really good budget. You're going to have to stick to it. And then, as I mentioned, I feel like one of the only ways for young people might really be to consider getting a part-time job. It's the only way I can imagine being able to accelerate your savings. Do you have any other ideas for that, Ralph?
One of the things that people don't really talk about or give credence to anymore is the property ladder. And what you were talking about earlier, Corey, the way at $1 million or up, how just almost unattainable it is for the average person without help from their parents or whatever it is, a big windfall from somewhere to come up with $240,000. I read this study that was put out by Zoocasa, and it looked at the average salary of $90,000 a year, or median in downtown Toronto. I would not say average across Canada for sure, but just say you're making $90,000 a year.
Which is a decent salary, or was.
It would take you 30 years to save up $200,000 to buy $1 million property. And by the time, in 30 years from now, that $1 million property is probably worth $2 million plus. So one of the ways to think about this as well, if you're really struggling to find a way to come up with a deposit, is to climb the property ladder and buy a studio at $500,000 or less than, and only put 5% down. Move into that studio, live there for a couple of years. Hopefully you get a nice studio in a decent location. And now is a very good time to do that if that's what you're looking to do. And then in a few years, build up equity, pay down your mortgage as opposed to paying rent, and position yourselves to be able to buy that larger condo in 3-4 years. And so that type of long-term thinking and planning is really, really helpful if you can have that vision to move up the ladder over 3, 5, 10, 15 years time. And that's the way previous generations have done it. And that's the only way that a lot of people are going to be able to get into the market is just get in at a very bare entry point, find the best opportunity you can. You can actually negotiate right now. There's lots of opportunities on the market, and move your way up. And I think that is really going to be the crux of the messaging for somebody who's young, who doesn't have a significant amount of resources, as a way to actually get into the market and start to build your net worth.
Yes, absolutely could not agree more. And I'm going to bring up something that seems controversial right now is because people seem so like anti-pre-construction, but we have always been fans of pre-construction totally acknowledging that resale right now is more affordable than new build or pre-construction, so something that has not been built yet. But the advantage of buying something off of a floor plan straight from the developer is that your deposits are staggered over a 3 or 4 year period. And right now, there's amazing incentives on pre-construction. And the benefit, and it was the benefit for me when I bought pre-construction, is it forces you to save for those deposits staggered over time. So if you struggle with savings, if you struggle with a budget, if you struggle with being like, how am I ever going to have $25,000 at one point in time, pre-construction might be an option for you to consider too, even though I am acknowledging it's more expensive on a price per square foot basis than resale right now, but is a really nice way to stagger out those deposits so you can just save in small clumps and it doesn't feel so freaking overwhelming for you. So happy to talk about that anytime as well, especially for those of you who are just like, I will never own real estate because it just seems so out of reach for me. Another thing you can do is you can have the talk with your parents or family. Is there anyone that can boost your savings? I think it's worth having the conversation. So many of our clients are accessing funds from the bank of mom and dad, and there's absolutely no shame in asking the question. And I know not everybody can do that, or their parents just don't have the money to help them. But if you're in a position with your parents or another family member that might be able to contribute or top up some of your savings, I think it's worth having the conversation. And maybe you could work out something with them. Like once you've built up a certain amount of equity that you could pay them back over time, or when you sell the property, they get a percentage of that. Whatever it is, you can work out something that feels very fair for both sides. And maybe that's a way that you could have that tough conversation with family members. And then you could
also, and also maybe even a loan. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be a gift, maybe just a lower interest loan. There's ways to structure things. If you have somebody in your family or network that has access to capital, there might be ways to structure this.
Yes. So definitely consider that. And then I think it's also worth, and Ralph, I don't know if you'll agree with this or not, but talking to a really good friend. So if you have a really good friend that you really trust, why don't you consider buying a property together and sharing some of these costs 50-50? And you can work out a contract with them, make sure you work something out with a lawyer so that it's very clear on the percentage of the partnership that you have with this person. Maybe it's a sister that you buy with or a brother that you buy with, a really good friend from elementary school, whatever it is. But this is an amazing way or smart way. If you're really like, I can't do it, maybe you can do it with somebody else. You got to trust that person and you've got to know that you can work something out on paper with them. But I think this is something worth exploring when you're looking for some practical tips to get you started.
Awesome.
Okay, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I just want to highlight these things. I'm going to put this in the show notes as well. But when you're starting your research, there's a lot of great resources out there for first-time homebuyers in terms of some of the incentives out there. So I'm just going to name what they are. I'll put them in the show notes. And when you're speaking to your mortgage broker, and possibly your financial advisor, if you have a good one, and we'll talk about that shortly. These are things that I want you to address with them to see if there's any perks for you as somebody who's trying to get into the market. So there's the federal home buyers plan. This has to do with withdrawing money out of your registered retirement savings plan. So you want to talk about that. You want to talk about your first home savings account and how you can save up to $8,000 tax-free towards purchasing a property. So you want to ask about that. You want to ask,
and it has a limit of up to $40,000.
Correct.
Lifetime.
Correct. You want to talk about or ask about first-time homebuyer tax credits and some of those benefits after purchasing your first home and what that could be for you. The homebuyer's amount for a tax return. So first-time homebuyers might be eligible to claim up to $10,000 of the purchase price on their home on their tax-free their tax return pursuant to the homebuyer's amount. So I'm not an accountant. Actually, this is probably an accountant question, but you want to ask about that. And then finally, the land transfer tax refund for first-time homebuyers. In Toronto, lucky us, we get to pay a double land transfer tax, which means for our newbies out there, our newbie viewers, when you're purchasing a property in Toronto, no matter what stage you are in this city of ours, we get to pay land transfer taxes twice. We pay the municipal land transfer tax and the provincial land transfer tax, which is a lump sum due on closing that has to be paid in cash and cannot be rolled into your mortgage. And it's a chunky sum, and it's a little bit nauseating because you just feel like you're like tossing money into a bonfire that you will never see again. But as a first-time home buyer, you get a rebate or a portion of that back. So you want to understand all of that as well. Ralph, do you want to add anything to that list?
No, there's just a lot of programs that are out there that can be utilized that a lot of people aren't even aware exist. And I think if you're looking at doing something a couple of years down the road, you can start to lean into some of these opportunities as tax-free shelters that can then be transferred into your purchase. So it's really important that you find out more information about all of these first-time buyer programs that are out there, and then incorporate that into your long-term vision, knowing that the deposit is going to be one of the hardest challenges to overcome purchasing.
It totally is the biggest challenge. And then the other challenge is like making a decision down the road about what you want to buy, but we'll talk about that shortly. Okay, so I think these are really, really great practical tips. I also think for some of you, if you have an awesome financial advisor, not like your mom's best friend or your dad's buddy who does financial advising as a side gig, you want to have like a really good financial advisor that you know and trust and have been referred to. You might be able to get some really great professional advice from them in terms of how you, as a potential purchaser down the road, can prepare your finances for real estate specifically. But I cannot stress enough how much you really need a great referral. A lot of financial advisors are very cookie cutter and not very creative when it comes to this, and very anti-real estate a lot of the time. So beware when you're talking to some of these so-called financial advisors. I just want to put that caveat out there.
Yeah. And I think a great tip might be, because you are right, there's this crazy push-pull oftentimes between financial advisors and real estate agents and mortgage brokers, because they all have different views as to what is the best investment vehicle. But real estate as a principal residence, which is tax-free when you sell your property in terms of the profit, there's nothing for a principal residence, in our opinion. Now, obviously, we're biased, but long-term, that's going to set yourself up more for success than owning your own home long-term. And so one of the things that could be helpful is if you find a mortgage broker that you really like and trust and want to work with, they may have, or they may be able to recommend a financial advisor that can help integrate where you need to be from the perspective of the mortgage broker. The financial advisor can help in companion with the mortgage broker, help get you there. And I think that might be a really interesting question when you're interviewing or working with a mortgage broker that you really like. Do they have a financial advisor who can help you sort out all of these programs and lean into them with your income?
Yes, I love that. I think we're giving some really good tidbits here. So another big hurdle for you to get over, my friends, and it's kind of a scary one. And every time I do it, I get so nervous, even though I know it's going to be fine. It's like when I have to do my police criminal background check for our real estate license, I get so nervous. And I'm like, the last person in the world that would have any criminal record would be me. And I still get nervous. So I'm relating it to that. You need to check your credit report. So generally, a mortgage broker can run this for you, and there's lots of programs online where you can run your own. But this is going to have significant impact to your mortgage application process down the road. So you need to figure out where you stand on your credit score. And it's amazing to me how many people have no idea. And a lot of people have really shitty scores. And a lot of people had no idea that their missed visa payment from 2019 is going to affect them today. So you need to review your credit report. You need to look for any errors. You need to dispute any errors. And this takes a while. So you want to get on top of this now and read it thoroughly. And then if your credit score sucks, which a lot of people's credit scores do, you need to work on, and maybe you'd work on this with the mortgage broker and the financial advisor, but like, what can you do to boost your credit score? So that generally means paying off debt. That's a huge one. Keeping your credit card balances low, and then avoid taking on additional debt. So,
and sometimes we see younger future buyers, or we see people who've immigrated to Canada, and it's not necessarily that they have a bad rating. It's just there's just nothing there. So one of the other things you can do is, if you're in that position, get a couple credit cards, run them up every month, and pay them off every month. And those are things so that if you don't have a track record, you can start building a track record so that when the time comes, you can have a really strong credit score.
Yes. And I know for me, when I bought real estate, the first thing I had to do before I even started saving for the down payment is I had to pay off my student line of credit first. So I had to chip away at that, which felt like it took forever. And then I had to start saving for the down payment. So this took me I bought pre-construction, and this is why, again, I go back to that as being like a possibility for some of you. This took me like 3 years of grit to get like that debt lowered to nothing, and then to build up the capital again to pay the down payment. So, or the deposits over time. So very, very helpful thing to do. Let us know if you have any questions about credit score. And then again, your financial advisor and your mortgage broker can help you with that. Another really important tidbit for you is to consider building a contingency plan or an emergency fund. So yes, there is the hump of saving for your down payment, but then in addition to that, there's extra costs like those beautiful land transfer taxes. And then on top of that, there's other costs that come out of acquiring real estate, like your lawyer fees, for example, or your cost to move, for example, or any general repair work that you need to do. So a general rule of thumb is that you want to have an additional, I don't even know if this is possible these days, an additional 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses to cover some of these unexpected costs. So you're not just stuck at the beginning of your home buying journey after you finally acquired something after all this hard work, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I have all of these additional costs and I didn't have my eyes wide open. So if you can, keep that emergency fund tucked away on the side, because you'll probably need to dip into it at some point.
It's so interesting. Like I read a stat, I'm sure the same thing is here, the same in Canada, but that in the US, I think 45% of the population has less than $1,000 in an emergency fund if they suddenly cannot work or run into some type of a financial emergency. So it's really important to have that put aside. And it's something I kind of always scoffed at myself, I have to be honest, especially in my younger years. But after COVID, I saw that like massive things can happen in the world, and having that net to fall back on is really, really important. And if you're looking at buying a property and committing to a mortgage, it's really important to have that type of buffer, not just for unexpected costs, but to make sure that if, in the event that you have an issue, that you have ways to pay the mortgage and put food on the table. Also having a line of credit that you do not use, but that is there for emergencies. If you have a short-term cash flow issue, that line of credit is really, really important, so that you can sleep at night knowing that not only do you have money put aside, but that you can dip into a line of credit. And the number one rule of business, get credit when you don't need it. Because the second you need it, you will never get any credit.
Yes.
I tell you that much for sure.
And I do have a personal story about this, and it collects all these thoughts into one anecdote. But I just feel like my first purchase was so dramatic because nobody told me any of these things, and I didn't have an agent, and I was just doing this all by myself, like completely naive. And again, I bought pre-construction, I saved for the down payments, put the deposits together, finally had the whole amount done. Credit was good, no debt. I did it. And it comes to closing. My lawyer calls me. You're coming on this day to sign the documents. And he's like, and you need to bring a certified check for $16,000 on the closing date. And I was like, for what? Because here I am, like, I saved, I paid those deposits. And he's like, well, you've got land transfer tax and development charges and construction fees and lawyer costs. And I legit, no idea. Like, total real estate moron right here. Like, no idea. And so I was sitting at my desk at work, bawling, like, obviously, like $16,000 after all that savings. I was just bawling, like hysterical, high drama, bawling. And thank God I did have an open line of credit. And I just went into there and I grabbed the $16,000 out of that contingency line of credit and went to the lawyer's office and closed on the property. And then I spent another freaking year paying down that $16,000 off my credit line. So thank God I had that. Else I would have had to go to my own parents as well and be like, oh my God, you guys need to help me. And I did not want to do that. I wanted to do it on my own. So that's a little story for you. And Ralph's heard that story so many times, but it's just very true. Maybe I've over dramatized over the years because I tend to skew high.
I feel like I lived it, even though I wasn't there. I feel like I did live through that.
Well, you didn't know me that.
I might retell that story as my own. I've heard it so many times. But it's such an important thing because you can end up in that situation if you don't have all of the information. And so it really is a great story, an anecdote for somebody looking to get into the market at a future date.
And if I could do it, you can do it too. And like, I mean, I'm telling you, full on real estate naive, and I managed to pull it off. And those fitness 100%. Classes as a part-time gig, those really added up. I got paid $30 a class back then. And I'm telling you,
that was a lot. You could shop at Loblaws.
Back then, yeah.
For $30. Yeah.
You could. Now
today,
you could get today that's
what
like a yogurt, a pint of raspberries, and some dog food.
Yeah.
At the most. That would be like a good day. Everything was on sale.
Lucky.
Yeah. Plus flyer and points. All right, let's just sort of move on from some of these like paperworky type things. And let's talk about getting educated, Ralph. So we are huge in terms of front loading on education. Maybe you could just touch on that briefly so viewers understand what we mean by that. Like, it sounds so cliche, like get educated on the market. But what does that really mean?
Buying real estate, especially your first time, is going to be one of the most scary and emotionally insane roller coaster rides. And it's going to be very tumultuous. So one of the things that we talk about when we talk to anybody, even if they're tenured investors or have bought and sold a lot of times, is to do your research up front when it's completely unemotional. So if you're thinking about buying a property in a year from now, why not figure out the area that you want to be in? Why not figure out and learn as much as you can about the process? Why don't you understand as much as you can about how the market works and why potentially buying in a year from now is going to be a really good idea 5 years from now? And so do all of that research, assemble your team of trusted advisors and who you can lean on. Educate yourself as much as possible so that when you are in that position and you have to write that scary check, you're not nervous because you've done all of the research. You haven't left everything to the last minute. And what you're doing, as scary as it is, you're doing it with high conviction because you believe that this is the right thing for you to do. And you're not second guessing it as you're trying to figure out everything as you go.
Yeah, that is so true. And you want to familiarize yourself with terminology that, you know, Ralph and I take for granted and we just toss out there that everybody feels like we think everybody understands. Because we've been doing this for so long, but you want to get familiar with what are these land transfer taxes that she's talking about? I'm kind of confused. And like, what does a certified deposit check really mean? I don't know what that is. I feel like an idiot asking anyone, but I should probably figure out what that is. And what's a bidding war? What's a bully offer? Like, all these terms get tossed around. And I know, again, for me, I was like, I don't know the difference between a townhome and a row home and a semi-detached and a condo apartment and a condo townhouse. There's like all these different terminology for property assets. And I just didn't understand any of it. And so just even familiarizing yourself with all the terminology and then the steps that are required to acquire, it's just going to make you feel, as Ralph said, just so much more confident in a time where you are going to feel like barfing when you buy that first property. Like my hands were shaking so much writing the first checks out, like just vibrating. Like my hand was vibrating. I could barely write. And then my whole body, I think like vibrated for like a week after I did it because like my central nervous system was like, what did you just do? And then like my conscious self was like, I don't know. I just did it. I don't know what we're doing. And like we have so many stories of buyers at all different age categories and stages in life, like having full on meltdowns during this process. So if you're scared or you're confused, or you want to go into freeze mode, not deal with it, you're not the only one. Almost everyone. There are some people that are really chill. There are a few, but I would say most people, like 80%, are like high scale, freaking out at some point in the process. So you're not by yourself.
But if you do the work up front, you can really help mitigate that and position yourself to logically, rationally make a really smart long-term decision. So if you understand what modern monetary theory means and how we are devaluing our currency and only hard assets are going up in value, or you look at things like the green belt, or you look at things like the construction pipeline in the GTA and immigration and demographics, and you start to really understand what all of this information means, I think you'll position yourself so that you know what you're doing is the right thing and you know that with conviction. And when you're actually ready to start looking, seriously looking, you've done so much research that you've taken that so far out of the equation that you're not going to be paralyzed and that you're going to be making the best decision for yourself when the time comes because you prepared yourself. And you're not going to learn this in school.
No, and your parents aren't going to be able to teach this to you most likely either. So 1,000,000%. And I know, Ralph, whenever we are speaking to new buyers about all these things, I always get so excited for them knowing their trajectory is going to be amazing long-term. And I'm always so proud when people take that big leap of faith because it takes balls and there's a bit of risk involved, but gosh, it's really rewarding and it's so empowering. I can't even tell you how empowering it is. And then
you look empowered, Corey.
Yes. All right. Speaking of empowerment, I think attending workshops and seminars can be helpful as long as they are great resources for education and you're doing something that's locally based with people that you can trust, because there's a lot of like cheesy, douchey shit out there that's just trying to like take your money and like roll with it. I don't even know like how to become a real estate investor in 6 months and become a billionaire.
With no money down.
Like none of that. I'm talking about like probably free information. YouTube is an amazing resource now. Gosh, I wish I had this when I was at this stage in my real estate journey. But there are some really great local experts in all of your communities that are offering really amazing advice. Please try to avoid a lot of US content because their system operates so much differently than Canada. And then again, try to remain as local as you can. So if you live in Calgary, listen to Calgary information. If you live in Halifax, listen to Haligonian information. And if you're Toronto, obviously listen to us and some of our amazing colleagues that are producing excellent content too.
Couldn't agree more.
Good. I thought that you were going to be kind of like not into that at all, actually.
No, I'm into it.
Okay. I like that you're into it. All right. So now you've done a lot of this due diligence. You've spoken to some new strategic partners. You're kind of figuring out your finances. You have a savings plan in place that you're half committed to and you're trying to do it. Maybe you've started a part-time job. You understand that you need to improve your credit score and you're listening to some really great podcasts and you're like, okay, now I feel like I'm ready to get into like the next phase of this. I think hiring a really good real estate agent or buyer agent is a next great step. So Ralph, tell me a little bit about looking for a great agent. How does anyone find one? Like there's a gazillion of us out there. How does anyone know where to start with this?
I think it's really important to interview a couple of agents and not just work with the first person that lands at your feet, which is normally somebody's cousin's brother's uncle's best friend who just got their license. There is a tremendous difference between a highly experienced, competent agent who can walk you through the process and advocate for you and your best interests versus somebody who's just looking to transact or doesn't even know what they're doing. So I think interviewing is really, really important, and taking this as serious, given the level of investment. Like, there's a stat that like 75% of most people, when they work with a buyer agent, especially for the first time, only interview one.
Crazy.
That's crazy, because if you look at when somebody will spend more time planning a 2-week vacation than they will making the largest financial commitment of their entire life, which is just mind-boggling to me. So do the research. Look at online reviews. Look at online presence. Speak to a few people. Look at who you feel that you can openly communicate with, and that's somebody who has the tenure and experience who can advocate on your best behalf. The other just little tidbit I'll give you is that if you look at any market, it is dominated by teams, and I would find somebody who's on a team who's very strong, who can look after your best interests, because they'll really know the area and they'll really have their finger on the pulse. And I think those are things that are really important as part of your process. And going back to what I said earlier, it's really important to assemble a team. So have your real estate agent that you're going to work with, have your mortgage broker, have your accountant, have your financial advisor, have your team. Have your contractor even lined up so that you have this amazing team that's supporting you as you go through this process, because it's very daunting to try and do this alone. And so once you have this team assembled, you'll be able to move forward with a lot more confidence than just trying to figure this out on your own on the fly. And we have seen so many people over the years who've made bad first purchases, which has set them back. And you see it more in a down market, like the one that we're in. And you're seeing a lot of people who are trapped in a lot of places right now, and they can't get out because they're underwater. And so making sure that you make really good connections and you do the heavy lifting up front when you're not super emotional because you're looking a couple years out or a year out, I would recommend that highly.
Yes. And I think it's not too early to get this team assembled. So don't feel embarrassed that you're like, I'm not ready to buy for another year or two. It's okay to start having casual conversations with people now so you can get your ducks in order. And the only other thing I'd like to add to that is I want you to feel really like yourself with this team. Like, I want you to feel really comfortable with whoever you hire, because you're going to be working with them really intimately. So you want to feel like you can ask them questions and not feel stupid asking questions, that they have patience for you and that you can trust them, because they're going to be your buddy for a turbulent period in your life. And not to say you have to be besties with this person, that's not what I'm saying, but you want to feel like you can be yourself and say what's on your mind. And this person is not acting or like playing the role of an agent. They can be an advocate for you and a really good sounding board. So take your time in this process. And there's no better time than starting with that interview process right now to set you up for 2 years from now. All right. The fun part. This is what everyone thinks real estate's about. And it is, for sure. And it is super fun. So we don't want to like scare you to death, because it is fun looking for a property. But this is like the more creative fun part for sure. And I think everyone thinks it starts here, when it's actually like reverse engineering. You have to do all the boring stuff first, and then you get it to do the fun stuff. And so the fun stuff is prioritizing your needs. What do you want? What do you want to buy? Where do you want to be? What do you want it to look like? How many bedrooms do you need? How many bathrooms? Do you need a balcony? Do you need parking? Would you be okay with street parking? Can you do a reno? Like, start putting all these pieces together. And of course, you're going to have to work within your budget, which I know kind of sucks because we all want more than we probably can afford. And you're not alone in that. But like, what's really important to you? Location is obviously going to be really important. How willing are you to commute to work? Do you want to be able to walk to work? Are you willing to go on the GO train, the subway? Like, all these questions. And so start putting a list together of like things you really must have, things that would be nice to have, and things that you probably wouldn't be able to afford, but gosh, it would be a surprise if you could pull it off. Just start gathering that information, and then start really being good at tracking what's happening in the asset class or the type of property you're interested in. And there's great apps now. Like you can get the Listed app or the Realtor.ca app or House Sigma app, and you can start searching and tracking properties on your own. And you can see the sales history, what it's listed for, what it's sold for, and all this great data that's just at your fingertips that you can like take a peek at while you're walking to work or heading to Starbucks for your morning coffee and just start absorbing some of this information. But I really encourage you to stay within the price range that you think that you'll be purchasing in. So if you're looking for your first condo, pay attention to those small little nuggets. Or if you're looking for that first freehold property that might need a little bit of tweaks and work down the road, pay attention to that price category and some of the neighborhoods of interest for you.
Awesome. I think just to take a step back where you're talking about prioritizing your needs, Cora, I think it, and you are, I know, a big advocate is this as well, is once you have a vision of something, it's a lot easier to move to that vision. Just to say, oh, I want to buy a house in Leslieville, or just to say I want to buy a house, whatever, it's one thing. But when you actually have a vision of what the backyard would look like and what the sounds would look like and what it would feel like to wake up in your own home, if it's a studio or a 2-bedroom condo or a freehold house or a detached home, like whatever that is, the more you can visualize it and internalize it, the easier it is to start working towards it. And the more clarity you have on where you're going, the more you'll be apt to have conversations with people or pick up the phone and call a mortgage broker or talk to your parents or talk to friends or go to open houses or spend time in neighborhoods. If you can feel it and you can see it in here, it'll be much easier to take those scary steps because you know where you're going. And it's just a question of how do you get now from here to there. And so we are big advocates of that. And the more crystal clear you can get on what you want and where you want it to be and feel like and how you want it to experience and enhance your life and why it would be such a good thing for your life, when you know that in here, it's far more easier to cross that chasm than just being like, yeah, I want to buy something in a couple of years, I don't know.
Yeah. Completely. And just to even take that a step further, because I'm such a visual person, when I did my first condo savings, I had like a couple of tools like that. One is a printout of the condo that I had purchased was at my desk at work. So I saw it every single day. And I also drew out, and Ralph, you know the story, but I like drew out these like thermometers, almost like when you see like a charity drive and then you see those thermometers and they're like, we're reaching our goal. And then every day the thermometer goes up. I had the thermometer for my savings. And like every time I like got closer and closer to the next deposit needed or whatever, I would like fill it in with red marker. And those two visual aids lived at my desk. I'm sure my coworker was like, what is she doing? They just like stayed in my mind, and it just made it so much easier to know that I was progressing versus just feeling like, oh my God, another weekend where I'm teaching a million spin classes and I'm not going out because I have to save for the thermometer. So I'm totally a big advocate of that too, Ralph. And I'm so glad you brought it up. Awesome. A couple other points about this, the fun part is, and we touched on it briefly, is you got to visit neighborhoods. And if you've like grown up in Toronto or any city in Canada and you like grew up in a neighborhood and went to high school in the same neighborhood, you might not know how many awesome pockets are in your community. And some of them are more affordable than others. So, if you don't have nothing to do on a Saturday, go explore where you live and check out all the different communities. And if you're not familiar with the East End, head out east. If you're not familiar with the West End, head to the West End. Pick an area, grab a coffee, and walk around on foot. Not drive, walk. Walk into stores, walk into coffee shops, go to a local bakery, go to a local butcher, and just get a vibe of the area. You're going to see the age demographic. You're going to see like families with kids, people with dogs. Like, are you relating to this? Do you feel like this is where you could find yourself at home? You really, really need to explore neighborhoods to get a sense of the city. And places like Toronto and Vancouver that are so big, you really need to take the time to do this. And this is the perfect time. You've got a year or two ahead of you. So might as well make this part of your strategy. And then in addition to that, my friends out there that are like, I'm going to buy real estate in 2 years, just go to public open houses. Walk into public open houses. Go check out properties. You're totally allowed to go in. So go look at them. Just go look at them. Feel like, how do you feel in this space? Does it feel big? Does it feel small? Could you live there? What's it worth? What's it listed for? What does it sell for? And just track it. Walk into properties. Everything looks so different in person than it does in a thumbnail on your phone. So there is no shame in walking around, going to public open houses. And Ralph and I have done hundreds and hundreds of open houses. And let me tell you, 99.99999% of people are just snooping anyways. So why don't you just join the masses and check it out?
Awesome. Couple things I'll add to that. Going back to visiting neighborhoods, think strategically about neighborhoods. Be like, wow, this is really inexpensively priced comparative to other neighborhoods, but there's a lot of infrastructure, there's transit coming in, there's big investment, there's development slated. And if we were to buy in a year and a half or 2 years, and in 5 years, all of this change is happening, think strategically, do your research, and look for those little gem neighborhoods that might be overlooked or undervalued today vis-a-vis what's going to be happening there in the future. And when you go to those neighborhoods, talk to people, talk to actual residents, like go to a coffee shop and say, hey, just start a random conversation with somebody. Do you live around here? What's it like? Is there crime? Is there this? What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? And I think getting that boots on the ground information in conjunction with high level research about where an area could be in 5 years and how today it could be undervalued given all of the changes that are coming. I think that's really important when you start to research neighborhoods. And it's shocking to me how many people really don't know Toronto or don't know much more about the city other than where they grew up or where they currently live or when they came here, where they chose to live. And so this is a really big city. And over time, it's going to become more and more like New York, where people just live in a neighborhood and they stay in that neighborhood and they don't leave because traffic and transit is a disaster. So neighborhoods and location over time, as the city continues to grow, is going to become more and more important. So really do that research, expand your horizons. You might just find a hidden gem out there or something that really could make sense long term where you could get a tremendous amount of value today.
Yes.
So that's one point. And then the second thing, going back to open houses and what we were talking about earlier, is what a great way to be like, wow, this is the house or this is the condo or this is the property that I could one day aspire to see myself living at. And when I'm taking on a second job or when I'm doing things that I wouldn't normally do, I now have stood in that property. And I think that's really important. I think it's really important to see properties that you've seen online and then go see in person, because the way they're represented online can be very, very, very different, mostly to the negative when you actually go stand in the property, and sometimes even to the positive. And so I think it's a really important part of the education where you're like, wow, oh my God, this looks amazing. You go in and you're like, oh my God, this place is dump. Or who would pay that amount for a property? And then lastly, I think when you go to an open house and you've stood in a property and then you see what it sells for, that really gives a much better barometer in terms of how the market is behaving and what things are worth when you've stood in a property and then seen its final sale price. And that is always the best temperature check, much better than looking at pictures online and seeing a sold price, into understanding the market. And if you track this over time and you stay active with this over time, you'll start to see trend lines in the market, and that will put you in a better position when you're actually ready to buy.
Great advice. And one practical tip on this, if you're like, I don't even know how to find open houses, the app realtor.ca will have the open house schedule for the property that you're interested in on the right-hand column when you scroll down. So if you're like, ooh, this place looks really interesting, I like it, you can just scroll down on the bottom right, you'll see the schedule. Generally, for our newbies out there, open houses run on Saturday and Sunday between 2 and 4 across the city. Or you might just see a sandwich board sign on the road, just follow that along and then just walk right into the open house with confidence. You have every right to be there, no apology necessary. And I would just forewarn that some agents at open houses seem to be like trying to acquire clients at these things. And so they'll be trying to get your information and your email address and all of this stuff, which you can totally provide, but just beware that that doesn't have to be the agent that you work with just because you gave them your contact information. So I just don't want you to feel like you're all of a sudden got sucked into something and you can't get out of it.
Great advice.
So,
great advice.
I like to talk to everyone who feels like dumb about the business when they're new, because I felt like that. I'd be like, oh my God, I gave them my email address. What did I do? Now I'm forced to work with them because I feel bad. So don't be like me, basically.
God. No, don't do that.
All right. Well, I think this was super helpful. And to be honest with you, I can't believe we've never talked about this on the pod before. So the other thing I just want to make a request. If there's other topics that you're like, oh, I wish I knew more about this, we probably have a huge library covering some of these topics already on our YouTube channel. So if you're like, oh, I want to know more about this, make sure you stay here and search around a little bit more. You can also follow us on Instagram for really valuable, great tips. And our Instagram handle is @_Fox Marin, and we provide tons of great content there for you as well. So thank you so much for tuning in today's Toronto Real Estate Podcast. We hope today's tips help you on your journey to home ownership in the next couple of years. You can do this. Don't forget to subscribe for more insights and strategies. And until next time, happy planning. And be sure to drop all of your questions, no dumb questions, in the comments below, because we absolutely love to hear from you. Ralph, how do you always like to conclude our pod?
Please, 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 please be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. If you like our content, give us a big like. If you have any questions or even comments that you'd like to add, as long as it's constructive, we'd absolutely love to hear from you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We love each and every single one of you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Ralph.
Okay. Bye-bye.